Will Smith. What is he? Part 2. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor, and welcome back to the analysis of what Will Smith is to aid your understanding of the world around you and the dynamics of people that inhabit it. In continuing the analysis of Will Smith, we're going to turn to a piece that appeared some time ago. Although it's described as an interview, more accurately, it is almost like a confessional that's been provided by Will Smith, and therefore it's worth going through it in its entirety because it provides us with so much information about his character, mindset, outlook, and what we can draw from that. Throughout my life, he wrote, I have been haunted by an agonizing sense that I am failing the women I love. Over the years, in my romantic relationships, I would always do too much, coddling, overprotecting, desperately trying to please them, even when they were totally fine. This insatiable desire to please manifested as an exhausting neediness. To me, love was a performance, so if you weren't clapping, I was failing. To succeed in love, the ones you care for most constantly applaud. Spoiler alert, this is not a way to have healthy relationships. There is so much packed into this first paragraph. First of all, this could be the comment of an aware narcissist, saying, I realize that love was a performance. I realized that I needed to put on a performance because I needed a reaction. That I needed a reaction from people, which of course would, in my lexicon, mean the provision of control and the provision of fuel. So at first blush, might this suggest that we're dealing with an aware narcissist? Maybe, albeit it would be unusual for such a disclosure to be made, because invariably an aware narcissist is less likely, unless they really see value in doing so, to demonstrate their awareness. Of course, Will Smith isn't saying here, hello, I'm an aware narcissist and this is how I tick. He is saying that he recognises love was a performance, and therefore it might be that whilst he's very much aware of what he is not telegraphing it in a way that anybody reading it, certainly those that are not educated with narcissism, would pick up on what's being said. So it's worthwhile making that point. Could it be more likely that in actual fact these are the words of an unaware narcissist? This does seem potentially more likely in terms of talking about how he was always trying to do the right thing, that he was trying to please, even though actually there was nothing wrong with them. This has the smell of a mid-range activity, doesn't it? In terms of, I kind of got it wrong and I'm admitting that now, although of course coming from a narcissist, this would be false contrition. It might be, of course, the narcissism allows the unaware narcissist to say, love's a performance, in order to manipulate in that moment, even though it's not a deep-seated and genuine held belief, which of course could change in the next moment. It could be that the narcissism allows him to talk about essentially needing control and fuel through this description. Also, of course, it could be interpreted as this is an empathic individual that feels that they need to do so much for other people. The behaviour of a codependent. The codependent, of course, starts life marching towards becoming a narcissist. And if you'd like to understand more about that, do read my excellent book, Chained, which you'll find in the Knowledge Vault or on Amazon. Talking about coddling, overprotecting, desperately trying to please the people pleaser. The individual that chains themselves to the narcissist and finds validation by remaining under the wing of the narcissist, under the umbrella of the narcissist, by lashing themselves to the narcissist and giving and giving and giving and giving. We have already established, of course, what his wife is, and therefore might this be an empathic individual that is catering to his need to save people, to find validation by pouring himself into the black hole that is the narcissist. This opening paragraph could take us in varying different directions, and that's why it's important for us to continue to look at the range of information. but it gives an excellent insight into his mind. When I was 9 years old, Smith wrote, I watched my father punch my mother in the side of her head so hard that she collapsed. I saw her spit blood. That moment in that bedroom, probably more than any other moment in my life, has defined who I am today. Suggests a lack of control environment as a young child witnessing physical violence, which is something that could go on the creation of a narcissist. It doesn't mean that it's guaranteed. Of course, witnessing such violence and having a traumatic impact upon the child can also take them in an alternative direction, but it does raise the possibility of a lack of control environment, one of the key constituent parts to becoming a narcissist. Within everything that I've done since then, the awards and accolades, the spotlights and the attention, the characters and the laughs, there has been a subtle string of apologies to my mother for my inaction that day, for failing her in that moment, for failing to stand up to my father. This could be genuine empathy for his mother and genuine contrition for his failure to act, but of course a child could not, and therefore it may also be the case that he's lashing himself to a form of impotence which isn't his fault, but he regards it as it being his fault, the mea culpa behaviour of the self-flagellation of an empathic individual. Alternatively, is it the case that he is able to utilise these events for the purposes of a pity play, to allow the reader to look upon what he's saying in order to be drawn in and to feel for him, to feel sorry for him? He continues, for failing to stand up to my father, for being a coward. What you have come to understand as Will Smith, the alien annihilating MC, the bigger-than-life movie star, is largely a construction, a carefully crafted and honed character designed to protect myself, to hide myself from the world, to hide the coward. Is this an aware narcissist speaking, talking about a construction? Well, certainly the false self, the construct, is something that the narcissist has generated by the narcissism. But again, such an admission would be unusual to be found from an aware narcissist. They would know that this is the case, but they wouldn't disseminate that knowledge. Instead, could it be an unaware narcissist expounding such a view, again for sympathy, giving the game away, but not realising he's doing so? It's important to understand, and I've explained this many times to my client, that some instances an unaware narcissist will say things which makes you think that they're unaware, because they'll talk about feeling an emptiness or that they create a persona in order to protect themselves. But where we've established that an individual is an unaware narcissist, that supposed confession isn't a real one, or rather isn't a genuine one. What it is that the narcissism allows them to say that in that moment for the purpose of assertion control, often by a pity play, to make them look like a complex individual. It isn't a genuine admission and acknowledgement of what they actually are. The narcissism, if you will, allows them to use the truth, of which they are actually unaware, in the fullest sense, to manipulate. And that might be the case with Smith. Again, it could be that he simply recognises that this is part of his character, and an empathic individual can put on fronts also, as can a normal individual, and indeed someone who's narcissistic. My father was my hero, he writes. His name was Willard Carroll Smith, but we all called him Daddy-O. Daddy-O was born and raised in the rough streets of North Philadelphia in the 1940s. The North Philly streets had a way of hardening you. You either crystallised into a mean motherfucker, or the hood broke you. So he's referencing the law of the jungle, in effect. Either do or be done to. The mindset and mentality of a narcissist. Daddy-O was smoking cigarettes by 11 and drinking by the age of 14. My father developed a defiant and aggressive attitude that would continue all his life. Early suggestions that Daddy-O might be a narcissist, and if that was the case, then we are seeing the suggestion that there was the potential for a genetic predisposition, father's narcissism passed down to Will Smith, combining with a lack of control environment in which Smith found himself. When he was 14, my grandparents, fearing where his life was headed, scraped together what money they could and sent him to an agricultural boarding school. Note that the grandparents, something that was touched on earlier, act as an intervening force, trying to steady the path for their own son. Of course, if he's a narcissist, it would be too late by that stage. The narcissism would have crystallised and formed. It was a strict and traditional place, and by sending him there, they hoped to introduce some much-needed structure and discipline into his life. But nobody was going to tell my father what to do. Rejection of assertion to control. Other than working on some of the tractor engines, he couldn't be bothered with what he described as that hillbilly bullshit. Dismissiveness, arrogance, lack of accountability. He would skip classes, he smoked cigarettes, and kept on drinking. Sense of entitlement, lack of accountability for behaviours. At 16, Daddy-O was done with this school. He decided to get himself kicked out. Lack of accountability. On his 17th birthday, he snuck off campus and enlisted in the United States Air Force. This was classic Daddy-O. He was so hell-bent on defying authority, i.e., rejecting threats to his control, that he jumped out of the frying pan of an agricultural boarding school and directly into the fire of the United States military. He ended up in the exact structure and discipline my grandparents had desperately hoped to instill in him. It also shows the collateral consequences of an unaware narcissist. As it turned out, Daddy-O loved it. It was in the military that he discovered the transformative power of order and discipline, two values that he came to worship as the guardrails protecting him from the worst parts of himself. Wake up at 4 a.m, train all morning, work all day, study all night. He found his lane. He discovered that he could outlast anybody, and he began to take pride in that. It was another aspect of his defiant attitude. Nobody could force him to wake up with a bugle because he was already up. A shining example of a narcissist at work, whereby he has to get up first, but at least he's still up early. With his passionate work ethic, boundless energy and undeniable intelligence, he should have quickly risen through the ranks. But there were two issues. First, he had a brutal temper, ignited fury. Second, his drinking, lack of accountability. Let me tell you, my father was one of the smartest people I've ever known, but when he was angry or drunk, he became an idiot. He would break his own rules, subvert his own objectives, destroy his own things. In actual fact, it isn't the drink, but that was just an exacerbation of the narcissism that was clearly there with regard to his father. If you listen to my video, Cheers, the Narcissist and Alcohol, that will give you further insight. After about 2 years in the military, the self-destructive streak peaked through the veil of order and ended his service career. One night, he and the guys from the platoon were gambling. Daddy-O was sweet with a pair of dice. Gambling is also a lack of accountability. It lends itself to financial haphazard behaviour. He took those dudes for almost $1,000. Once he'd stashed the winnings in his foot locker, he headed out to get something to eat. But when he returned, the guys had stolen back the money. In his fury, Daddy-O drank himself into a frenzy, took out his service pistol, and lit up the barracks. Nobody got hurt, but it was enough for the Air Force to show him the door. Haphazard employment, ignition of fury with collateral consequence of loss of job. He was fortunate that he wasn't court-martialed. Instead, they just discharged him and invited him never to come back. This was a tension that ripped through my father's entire life. He demanded such rigid perfection from himself and the people around him, the need for control, yet after too many drinks, or if he snapped, he would burn everything to the ground. The ignition of fury and the collateral consequences of such action. Daddy-O moved back to Philly. Undaunted, he took a job in a steel mill while putting himself through night school. He studied engineering and showed a real aptitude for both electricity and the science of refrigeration. One day, after being passed over for a promotion at the steel mill for the third or fourth time because of his race, he simply walked out of the door, assertion of control by withdrawal, and never went back. He knew refrigeration, so he decided he'd start his own business. Daddy-O was brilliant. Like many sons, I worshipped my father, but he also terrified me. He was one of the greatest blessings of my life, and also one of my greatest sources of pain. This synopsis of the life that Will Smith had with regard to his father demonstrates that in all likelihood his father is a narcissist. There are many indicators, even in that synopsis there, and I'm sure an expanded version would come to confirm that. And therefore, in all likelihood, his father is a narcissist. That means, as I mentioned earlier, that there is the potential for that genetic predisposition to be passed on to Will Smith. It also means that his father created a lack of control environment. It shows that he created a lack of control environment wherever he went, and of course in the home. And we will hear more from Smith with regard to these recollections. you will learn more about the environment in which he found himself. We'll pause here as in part 3 we continue this confessional, but as he tells us more about his mother. And we will learn more about how that has impacted upon Smith and forged what he is today.